As foreign policy has rarely been a preoccupation for an average American voter, in a very close race in November, the Middle Eastern alliance would work against the presidential Democratic candidate Kamala Harris and swing the U.S. election for Republican Donald Trump, thanks to Arab and Muslim Americans, said Dr. Sahar Khamis, a professor of communication at the University of Maryland and president of the Arab-U.S. Association for Communication Educators. In light of the upcoming election in the U.S., the expert outlines the key differences between the campaigns of Harris and Trump on this issue, the likelihood of renewed protests among American youth in response to the escalating situation in the region, and how, in her opinion, the foreign policy platform of an ideal U.S. presidential candidate should align with the interests of the American public. Dr. Khamis, thank you very much for joining us. Let me start from this point. As professor of communication at the University of Maryland, we witnessed over 100 of protests organized by American youth in order to stop the war in Gaza. What do you anticipate by the American youth in terms of their behavior and reaction to the situations in Lebanon and Iran? Please.
Thank you so much for having me, and I would like to say that definitely there has been a very loud and very effective voice for young students across university campuses in the United States and also in other parts of the world internationally when it comes to talking about the Palestinian issue and talking about the war on Gaza and protesting the killing of innocent civilians in Gaza. We haven't witnessed yet the momentum on campuses across the US and elsewhere regarding what is happening in Lebanon and what might actually happen in the region moving forward. There might be further escalations. That is expected, unfortunately, but we have not seen this student momentum build yet, maybe because it is still at an early stage in the escalations, and maybe also because there is still need for these students to organize themselves and to organize their protests in a more effective way.
Do you think they will follow the same scenario as with Gaza?
It's not going to be of the same magnitude. I expect that there may be some protests here and there on some US campuses that might very well be expected, but I don't expect that it's going to be with the same magnitude. And the reason is, in the case of Gaza, there are actually chapters of the Students for Justice in Palestine groups, which are very active among different universities and across different campuses. I don't think that there will be the same scale and the same magnitude of protests in the case of the attacks on Lebanon, but we might see some here and there.
Let us turn to the topic of upcoming election in the US in November. How would you describe the main differences, if any, between Democrat and Republican Party with respect to Gaza? And what do you anticipate with the cases of Lebanon and Iran?
Both of them call, quote unquote, Israel's right to defend itself. That has been the official narrative and the official rhetoric of different politicians across the aisle, whether you're talking about Republicans or Democrats. That is a very much a shared position. The only exception would be maybe some progressive politicians from the Democratic Party, especially the more liberal, the more progressive, the younger generation. Some of them are starting to speak with a different language and say, wait a minute, why isn't the US trying to have some kind of conditional rather than unconditional support for Israel when it comes to issues like providing, military weapons and arms and funding and all of that? But these voices are still few and far between. The dominant discourse across both the politicians belonging to the Democratic and the Republican Party is still the same in terms of supporting Israel's right to defend itself.
In my view, there is a little difference of Democrats' position, of Kamala Harris in particular, in the presidential debate against the Republican Donald Trump. She said that even though the US will continue to support Israel, their purpose is to stop the escalating process in Gaza. And how can it hurt Democrats, both domestically and internationally, if the situation in the Middle Eastern region will continue to escalate? Because I can hardly imagine the scenario in which the Democrats will benefit from the escalating situation or in general from Middle East regional war. Wouldn't it be self-harm in this regard?
Let me first comment on when you said that, the only difference is her rhetoric when she said, we also need to stop the war on Gaza. That is the rhetoric that Biden has been using since, October 2023, almost a year now, and we don't actually see any kind of stopping of the escalations in the war on Gaza, which is, by the way, still continuing, even if the whole world is now looking at Lebanon and what is happening there. The fact is there is still war on Gaza. So the rhetoric alone is not enough. There has to be some kind of policy change. We have not seen this policy change, and many Arab Americans and Muslim Americans do not expect to see a policy change under a Harris administration, which brings me to the second part of your question, which is about what is going to happen if the situation worsens or escalates in the Middle East. How would that hurt the Democratic candidate? Actually, I think that definitely the worsening of the situation in the Middle East is gonna affect the chances of both candidates, actually, the Republican and the Democratic, to get the Arab American and Muslim American vote. It is no secret that many Arab Americans and Muslim Americans are very much dismayed by the United States position on all of these issues, so much so that many of them are thinking about not voting at all, or voting uncommitted, which means not voting for either candidate, or voting for the third party candidate, in this case, Jill Stein, who is the representative of the Green Party. So this is called, quote unquote, a protest vote, which is basically a message that says we do not accept or endorse your policies. Who is it going to hurt the most? I think it's going to hurt Harris the most rather than Trump if she does not get these votes. And that might swing the election in the direction of Donald Trump, but it might be a very, very thin margin between both candidates.
That's an interesting statement, but how do Americans feel about the position of Republican Donald Trump, whose rhetoric is based on statement that if he becomes a president again, he will solve these conflicting positions and situations in the Middle East region within a very little time?
The idea of ending up war, of course, any kind of war, escalation, or conflict is always welcomed, right? Everybody welcomes the idea of stopping escalation. But Trump has been trying to always profile himself like, I'm the no war candidate. If I was president, the war on Ukraine would not happen because I have a strong relationship with Putin. The war on Gaza would not happen because I will be able to stop it. And, further escalation in the Middle East will not happen. The question is, how would he get there? And the answer, in my opinion, is by giving more and more to Israel so that Israel is more satisfied, so it does not have to engage in any kind of actions like what we are witnessing right now. Let's remember that Trump had a very, very serious rhetoric recently when he talked about Israel is very small in size. That actually means if he becomes the president again and he is the occupant of the White House in November, it means that there's going to be possibly more land added to Israel, possibly the West Bank, possibly other types of geographic expansion in favor of Israel. That is his vision of not having conflict. It's giving Israel more rather than less. And again, that is something which does not sell very well and does not fly very well with the Arab American, Muslim American communities in the US and elsewhere.
Dr. Khamis, as an author of multiple books on the communication area, how do you think the ideal program of leading U.S. candidate for president will look like according to American interests and moods nowadays?
Good question. Thank you for asking it. I think that the ideal scenario would be to actually say enough is enough. The United States does not want to be dragged into any form of war. It has been in Afghanistan for 20 years, and we have all seen what happened in Afghanistan in terms of the American withdrawal, which really brought a lot of criticism to the Biden administration, and rightly so, because of what we have been seeing there. And, we have seen what happened in Iraq. So it's not in the United States' interest in any way, shape, or form to be dragged or to drag itself into any form of conflict, into any form of wars. Not now, not in the future. The American economy needs the American money. There has been an article that's been published, very, very interesting, saying how there has been, this, horrible environmental crisis, of course, in North Carolina, and there have been people needing aid and needing help and needing support in the amount of almost $8.9 billion, which is almost the exact same amount that the United States just added in terms of military aid and military support to Israel. So what does that tell us? It tells us that the American public is not very happy in terms of the fact that it may not actually have the resources and the needs, even in the case of an environmental crisis, even in the case when people have to flee their homes and they cannot find a place to stay, and the government is sending money abroad in order to support the ongoing war efforts and sending more and more soldiers and troops. There are now more than 40,000 American troops stationed in the Middle East region, and two huge U.S. aircraft carriers stationed in the Middle East. That means the U.S. is definitely giving its full military economic support to Israel in its ongoing efforts. And I would say that the ideal candidate, in my opinion, would be someone who says enough is enough. Taxpayers' money should go to American interests, and we should not endorse or support any kind of war efforts anymore, and we should not be dragged into any form of war, not now, not ever.
Is there any chance that U.S. presidential candidates might change their policy in foreign affairs given the current circumstances?
Fortunately, with the two-party system that is dominant in the United States, either the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, as we said before, there isn't really a huge difference between the agenda of both parties. The only difference would be a little bit of difference in rhetoric here or there, but at the end of the day, people are going to make a choice between Trump and Harris. The policy, at least on the short term, is going to stay the same. Now, whether the American public could have an impact on the American administration's position, let me just tell you two things. Number one, the American voter is much more interested in domestic issues rather than international issues and foreign affairs. He or she is going to vote based on things like food prices, gas prices, the price of housing, education, health insurance issues, these types of issues. These types of issues are the top of the agenda for the average American voter. It is not the international foreign affairs. This is number one. So these issues are very much impacting minorities like the Muslim Americans, the Arab Americans, but it's not impacting the mainstream American voter. Issue number two, like we said, yes, there is change in terms of some of the progressives and liberals and the younger generation and the protesters across campuses, but these are small, they're few and far between, and we have to wait for some time until some of them reach positions of power in Congress as senators and congresspeople and so on, in order to be able to have a real impact on American policy. That is not going to happen on the short term. It might happen on the long term.
Thank you very much, Dr. Khamis, for your time. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you very much.